often imitate it, never duplicate it. People have tried on stations all over to bring it to you at this time every day, but we had it first. Johnny Mack is in the house. What's happening?
Wow, thanks, Mike. I think after preseason football, I need intravenously about a 6-pack, maybe a 12-pack.
Wow, that's an aggressive statement right there from Johnny Mack. I like it.
I like that. Johnny Mack will be coming on daily after a 30-pack. All right, just kind of give us an overview, number one. Some of the things you're looking at tonight, third preseason game. This is the one where the last time we're going to see the starters at all. So what are a couple of things that you'll have your eye on tonight?
Well, I think you want to see some production from the first-team offense. What's out there is the first-team offense, because obviously a number of key contributors are still not ready to go. But you want to see him move the football at least a little bit. And Doug's got a more traditional thinking for the third preseason game, so you'll probably see the guys potentially playing into the third quarter, because you want to have that sort of replicate what it's like in the regular season to go into the locker room and come out at halftime. Now, while I say that, though, I think if you see some success, especially from the offense, I think you might get those guys out of there a little bit quicker. But from what we've seen in the first two preseason games, and understand this is far more important for Cleveland. They're trying to change the whole philosophy there. Not even, when you think about 1-31, you think about where that organization, the depths they've been at, and the Super Bowl champions are coming in. You could see them being a little bit psyched up and maybe throwing some blitzes and trying a little bit too hard in the preseason game. And by the way, the Browns are favorite. I know you got an odds maker coming on. The Browns are actually favorite in this game.
Well, it's interesting to say that, because if you watch the Hard Knocks, Hugh Jackson said it like, we have to be better at home. We have to start playing better games here. And, this is a game that it's at home. I get it. It's a preseason game. But if they're trying to change the culture and set the tone, you're going to probably see a team really – you can send a message, as Michael Kendrick tried to. We have more talent here than we had in Philly. This is a game that they're probably trying to use as kind of like we say it all the time in the regular season that, hey, this game can set the tone for your season. Crazy enough, this preseason game might be able to try to set the tone for the Browns in changing their culture.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of a little bit, when we talk about dress rehearsal, sort of what the Eagles are going to be facing all year as Super Bowl champions. It's no more underdogs. Nobody's taking them for granted. Everybody's going to get up for that particular game because the champions are coming in. I think you rarely see it in the preseason, but because of where the Browns are and where they were, they're a little bit different. But you're going to see that type of thing in the regular season. You are. People are going to get up for the Philadelphia Eagles.
They sure are. And one of the things, when you get up for them, you're going to most likely have to get up for Carson Wentz, who will not be in the lineup. But I know you've been somebody, John, who really thought that he'll be ready for game one. As we enter the third week of the preseason, have you wavered on that at all?
No. It is going to be very close, and I know Carson has said that, but as I've explained since early on, it's definitely you're pushing the limits of the 9-month span, which I've gotten from doctor after doctor, independent. It's a week earlier, and people look at the schedule and say week 2 makes more sense because you have the extra time. You have the 10 days, and then you clear that 9-month barrier. But again, I've said it a lot. I think people don't understand. This is not a football decision. This is not about being cautious or about pushing somebody. This is strictly a medical decision. And it's up to the doctors and the medical staff of this team. That's where they come into it. If they clear him, he plays. If they don't clear him, he doesn't play. So from that standpoint, it's pretty simple from an organizational aspect. But they're not going to say, oh, we're going to hold Carson back a week because we have that extra time. Stuff like that doesn't enter the equation.
Mm-hmm. A couple of the other things for tonight. I mean, we know on the offensive line, essentially that's all locked up. We know that the wide receivers, there's a lot of injuries. But is that an area tonight where maybe a guy like Shelton Gibson, who looks like he's going to make the team, but how about the other guys? What's their role and the opportunities at wide receiver tonight?
Well, I think, and I kind of intimated this on the show, I think the injury to Richard Rodgers plays into wide receiver as well when you start building your roster, because if Rodgers isn't ready for week one, you might need an extra tight end at least early in the season. That can impact a possible sixth receiver. And if it does, all those guys we've been talking about, it really doesn't matter because the five guys are locked in, and that's Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar, Mike Wallace, Shelton Gibson, Mack Hollins. They're going to make this football team. So I think for most of the summer, because the Eagles are pretty deep at the position, at least with name talent, you have Marcus Wheaton, Kamar Aiken, plus a lot of young guys they like. A lot of people assumed they would keep six. I assumed they would keep six. That could change if you need that extra tight end. For
and who's the favorite to be the sixth?
Well, that's up in the air, and that's I think one of the biggest battles of camp because everybody's been hurt. Wheaton has been hurt, not been able to get on the field. Aiken's hurt. Bryce Treggs is now hurt. I thought he was making a run at that sixth spot, and then he pulls up with another hamstring problem. And Greg Ward has kind of taken a step back, I think. He was in that conversation, but hasn't necessarily performed. You saw Rashard Davis make the bad decision on the punt return. So a lot of these guys have gone backward, and that's also part of the reason they say, who hasn't gone backward, although he's banged up as well, is Joshua Perkins, who's had a great camp. And if you need that extra tight end, maybe he surpassed those guys.
John, is Mack Hollins going to play tonight?
I don't know. He was back at practice, so that would lead you to believe he would. But they could be cautious with him because he's still one of those guys, despite the fact that he's had a disappointing summer. He's part of this team, if only for the special teams aspect. He's a very good special teams player. So it's not like he's a threat of – there is a threat of him losing a roster spot, so they could be cautious with him. But from his standpoint, if he's ready to go, I think they should play him because he needs to be out there as a receiver. He needs to start going in the right direction from that part of the game because he just hasn't had a good summer. Maybe some of it has to do with the sports hernia surgery. But to be honest, I don't buy that because when camp started, he was playing and he was taking first-team reps without Alshon Jeffrey. He just didn't perform well.
Right.
And then they scaled him back, and he was banged up. And maybe, as I said, it was because of sports hernia injury. But I didn't see any noticeable movement problems or anything like that. He just wasn't playing well.
John, is the fourth running back spot going to be won tonight? And how much of a chance is that the fourth running back this year is not even on the roster right now, that they might have to go outside of what they currently have?
Yeah, I was going to say it could be one tonight, but it could be one, or it could be one over this weekend, this round of games in a different city, because everybody's been so bad in that run for the fourth running back slot. That could be a situation where you look at the Eagles picking somebody up off waivers and go in that direction. But, hey, there are positives to each player with the possible exception of Matt Jones and Donnell Pumphrey. I can't come up with a real good sort of story for them to try to make this team. For Wendell Smallwood, I said, and he's the guy that I have penciled in. It's definitely not in pen. It's definitely in pencil. But because of his special teams value, And then Josh Adams has shown a lot as a runner when he's been able to be out there, but he's been banged up so much. That's hurt him as well. So, yeah, I could see that as a position where they look to the waiver wire. That probably and linebacker are the two most likely positions to see something like that.
Which is interesting because I guess Pumphrey said that his hamstring is back to 100%, but he's not going to play tonight. He said he'll practice when they get back from Cleveland, but will there be enough time left for him?
I don't think so, and that is kind of a weird disconnect because Donnell did tell us he was ready to go and he could play in this game, and the Eagles said the exact opposite. He's not ready, and he's not going to play in the game. So it certainly sounds like, from if you're reading the tea leaves properly, that the Eagles have kind of given up on him. I think that's where we are with Donnell Pumphrey, and obviously not being able to play in the preseason till week 4 when it doesn't matter. I don't see how he changes people's minds, and if that's all he has to work with. I just don't think it's going to happen.
John, how much of Nick Foles are we going to see tonight? Is it going to be the entire first half? Is it going to be the first quarter? And then how much of Sudfeld are we going to see? Because we saw a lot of him last week. Are we going to see any Hackenberg, or how is this all going to be divvied up tonight with being the official quote unquote dress rehearsal?
Well, I think they're scheduled to play into the third quarter, but as I said, I think if the offense specifically plays well, I think Doug might change in game and get them out of there a little bit quicker, just to say if they have a couple touchdown drives or even a couple scoring drives to sort of get them out there on a high note after the starters have struggled so much so far in the preseason. I could see that happening, but the theory, as I mentioned before, of the dress rehearsal game is to make it as close as a regular game as possible. And the thing you want to do with the starters is have them go into the locker room, cool down, and then have to go out and play in the third quarter again. That's generally what people do, and that I think that's the Eagles' plan, but I think it could shift in-game depending on how the offense specifically plays. I think for the defense, that's the way it'll go.
We talked a lot about Big V. Is this a big bounce-back game for Vitae, or is that overblown a little bit?
I think everything in the preseason is overblown.
That's a good point.
I mean, you'd like to see him play better than he did against New England, and he admitted that. It was a terrible game and a terrible effort. So you certainly don't want to see that again. But worst-case scenario, if you do see it again, I mean, other than potentially hurting the quarterback, I think that's the bigger issue. I don't know how you get too crisis-centric about somebody's performance in a preseason game. Yeah. I've said it before. It's difficult for veteran guys, especially veteran guys, and that's what V is now at this stage of his career, who's just coming off a Super Bowl win. From a human nature aspect, how do you get up for a game like this? It's difficult. It's not easy. Now, you got to perform better than he did, but I got news for you. Except for Brandon Brooks, none of the offensive line played well. Lane didn't play well. Jason didn't play well. Wiz didn't play well. And nobody noticed that because V was so bad. Most of the rest of them didn't play as well either. Nobody's questioning that, nor should they.
That's interesting, with this offensive line, which many people, John, would think is a big strength of the team. Are they still one of the strengths of this team? Oh, yeah. I mean, the two biggest, there's three big strengths of this team when Carson is healthy, and that's offensive line, defensive line, and quarterback. I mean, that's where they set themselves apart, and that's pretty good. That's why I say I'm not concerned that much about the preseason. You have a top 5 offensive line, a top 5 defensive line, and a potential MVP quarterback if he's healthy. You're going to win a lot of football games. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. And one of the latest articles that you wrote this morning was all signs pointing to Sidney Jones in the slot. What happens to Rasul Douglas? What happens to Avonte Maddox? What happens to Devontae Bosby?
Well, as Jim Schwartz said earlier this week, no defensive coordinators are ever going to say, I want fewer cornerbacks. I mean, this is a league where you need corners. And they'll all be on this team. Even Bosby, I think they'll keep 6 corners. Rasul's the one guy, remember, because of his size, he wasn't even tried in the slot position. He's the backup right corner behind Ronald Darby. And Avonte Maddox, I think long-term, he's the nickelback on this team. I think if you're talking 2019, he's going to be your nickelback. But he's a rookie. He's still learning his way. So that there's no issues with him sort of sitting on the back end of the roster. And Bosby is a guy who's, I think, made a lot of strides coming up from the practice squad. But he's a big guy. Not from a weight standpoint, but he's 6'1", 6'2", and he runs a 4.3. I mean, he's an outside corner. So to put him in the slot, it just that's very difficult for somebody with that kind of length, and the fact that he's not from a weight standpoint, as I said, he's not a 205-pound corner like Rasul Douglas, so he's not going to hold up versus the run. So it is sort of the fit is the issue with the corners because the Eagles have talent at the position. We talked about it a lot, but they have all outside corners with the exception of Maddox, and Maddox is a rookie and he's still learning the position. So that's where they are, and they're going to try to get their 3 best players on the field, and that's Jalen Mills, Darby, and Sidney Jones.
I know I'm anticipating, excited to see Sidney Jones. Real quick, Dallas Goedert is the obviously the other kid, the rookie. He's the highest draft choice this team has, and he's another guy that has been a guy that we would want to that we've been watching in the preseason. And I'm just interested. I know you said the other day that you think that he'll have a similar role to like Burton. But I'm interested to see if they find more creative. Because I thought Burton, when he played well, but most of that was in games when Ertz was not in. It seemed that when Ertz was back, that Burton's role was kind of minimal.
Yeah, you're right, and that's the problem because it's very difficult to play, and I've talked about it a lot. It's very difficult to play 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends, if both can't block very well. And that was the issue with playing Zach and Trey together. You have the same issues with Zach and Dallas because neither blocking is not the strength of either. But Goddard has the frame to do it, as opposed to Burton, who did not. And he's already shown some aptitude for it. You saw some of those wham blocks in the first preseason game. He did a pretty good job on it, and Doug Peterson even mentioned it. So from that standpoint, I think the potential is there to get him on the field more than Trey was able to get on the field. And then the second aspect of it, he's a better receiver as well than Trey Burton. And he's just a more difficult player to handle from a defensive standpoint because of his size, his length, his catching radius, and he's got great hands to go along with it. So at least on paper, there's the potential to get him on the field at the same time, but we have to see how it works out, and that has to do with the blocking part of it.
Okay, at JF McMullen, Eagles and Browns. You could listen to the game tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Follow John on Twitter, and, of course, all of the Eagles coverage at 97.3ESPN.com. All right, pal, we'll recap it all tomorrow. Take care.
All right, thank you, guys.